I see we've already got some folks with us, so welcome to those of you who are right here as we click almost to the top, or if you're in India, the bottom of the hour. We're going to give people a minute or two to join before we officially get started.
Thanks, Andrew.
And for those of you who are just joining us, we'd love to know what brought you to this session today. So we've popped up a brief poll. You may be able to see it if you're on your computer. You may have to toggle over to the polls on the bottom of your screen to see the poll. And we welcome you. Just clicking a quick radio button to let us know what inspired you to join us on this Monday morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're logging in from around the world. Great. Thank you. I see people are able to access the poll, and thank you for joining. We're going to wait for about probably a minute or two after the official start time to allow people to log in and join us. I know there's a lot of back-to-back meetings, switching from Teams to Zoom and back again in many people's lives. So thank you so much for those of you who are here right at the click of the hour or half hour. So I see some of you have already chosen that you're currently on a learning transformation journey. So welcome. Hopefully there'll be tidbits of takeaways for you as you navigate this for yourselves, and that you'll recognize yourselves in the insights and information that our panelists will share today. And I see some people have already said, I'm just curious. So welcome to the curious, as well as those who want to learn from others who've been through this journey. So you're in the right place. For those of you with other, we'll look forward to, feel free to chat in and share with us what brought you here and what's on your mind. So I think a couple of people are saying they can't see the poll. There's a bar at the bottom where you see participants chat, raise hand, and that's where you're going to want to look for it.
Cool. Thanks, Andrea. Let's kind of get going, I think, in the interest of time. We've got a lot to cover. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar today, this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world, and joining us on this webinar around the topic of learning transformation. It's great to see so many of you here with us today. We're joined by a couple of folks that have been on this journey, a couple of guests, and thanks very much to both of you for joining. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little about your companies and your background in a moment. My name is Jonathan 18. My role here at NIIT is I'm Global Head of Consulting. I have been in the consulting arena in learning for probably the last 15 or so years, and seem to have been working on a lot of large-scale transformation efforts with various different clients in fast-moving consumer goods, pharma, banking, telecoms, and so on, and helped some of the world's kind of most interesting organizations on their journey to evolve their approaches to learning, which has obviously been interesting over the last half decade as we've evolved through COVID, and then obviously starting to look at the role that AI will touch on for the future of the function and the impact that it can make as well. I'm sure we'll get to that in a moment, but I'd like to introduce you to our two guests. Jeff, I'd like to start with you if it's okay. Jeff Orlando is the CLO of BMS, and perhaps Jeff, you could just spend a couple of minutes just explaining to the folks on the call, what exactly BMS do, how large you are, what you're embarking on with regards to your learning transformation at the moment, and what is your role inside that.
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody around the world to talk learning transformation, which is I think a never-ending topic of relevance for us all. And for me, I am here at Bristol Myers Squibb. Bristol Myers Squibb is one of the world's largest biopharma companies. We tend to work on rare disease or hard to treat disease. So we're doing work to really improve lives around the world. We're about 35,000 people, about 45 billion in revenue, based here in the United States with global operations. And we're a company with a very rich history, right back to the 1800s through today. And from a learning standpoint, we've really been focused on making sure our people have the skills. And we define skills very broadly, from the technical skills to develop the medicines of the future, to the leadership skills, to innovate our business that are needed in our ever-changing world and our very complex biopharma landscape, right? If you think about the emergence of new regulation, the instability of some of our global governments and how they're influencing our industry, or the emergence of artificial intelligence, which has already begun to take that life cycle time from molecule to medicine down by 30-40% already. We're in a world where our world is changing very quickly. So that means we need to learn and do differently. So I'll talk a bit today about our digital enhancements in learning, some of our, you might call it back to the fundamentals, investments in leadership development, and then our tighter connection across our talent ecosystem and with our business leaders too.
Oh, very good, Jeff. Thanks for the authoritative introduction. Tim's also joined us as well. Tim, welcome. Former CLO at Unilever. I know you've been on a bit of a journey through your career whilst at Unilever to help that evolution of learning there. A lot of notable firsts during your tenure. And obviously now you run your own independent bespoke leadership business, which clearly is helping very much, like Jeff said, with regards to the fundamentals of leadership in this new age. But perhaps you could put that into your own words for us. That would be very helpful.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thanks for having me here. Lovely to be with you, Jeff, and thanks everyone for joining on a really important subject. So yes, I spent 28 years at Unilever, over 5 years as the Chief Learning Officer, working with an amazing team there. Again, indeed, leading with them transformation of learning to try and both embed learning deeply, the critical capabilities deeply into the organization, purpose, well-being, but also to make it super easy for people to find the skills and the everyday learning that they needed through really trying to make the learning experience frictionless and trying to unite a very, very disparate learning function before that. Which indeed is where we work together, Jonathan. My passion has been in leadership development for a long time, so I decided to follow that, and so I now work with Inchigo, as you say, a boutique leadership development company. We try and help organizations with leadership in 3 aspects, really. We try to help strategically. What is the leadership that an organization needs for their strategy in their context? Because as we know around this call, there's no one thing called leadership. It's a set of behaviors and they're highly contextual. So we work with organizations to identify what they need. We work with organizations systemically. How do you, rather than just running an intervention, how do you shift leadership across an organization? How do you embed the right leadership deep into the culture? And then we work with organizations on leadership profoundly. Our view of the world is that leadership has 2 dimensions: the outer game, the behaviors, the skills that people use, but they all have a foundation on the inner game, our identity, our ability to manage ourselves, our presence, our awareness. And in fact, the outer game of skills is entirely dependent on that inner game. So we work on the deep fundamentals, the drivers of behavior, not just the behaviors themselves. We work at scale. Some organizations, we've just helped 2,000 bankers to connect to their purpose. And we also work individually with C-suite and CEOs on their own leadership development. That's a bit about Inchigo, Jonathan. Thank you.
Cool. Fantastic. So Jeff and Tim, I'm really pleased you're here. You both come with a lot of experience around this particular topic, and it is particularly pertinent at the moment as we lean into kind of this new industrial age, as it's being termed. So let's just jump straight in. I mean, Jeff, when you consider, you mentioned there, the speed to doing, some of the development of the drugs by increases of 30 to 40%. Your organization constantly is needing to be curious about the way science works to get its drugs through the research process out to market, and then to commercialize those as well. So, can you just help us understand, when you think about evolving learning in an organization that is innately curious as well through its science, what was the spark that kind of initiated your kind of review of operations at the moment, and what caused you to do it at this particular time in BMS's history?
And Jonathan, you spoke about curiosity in our business, and it's a real advantage for us in a learning from a learning team perspective, right? A lot of CLOs have a job where they need to create the desire to learn, or they need to create the motivation to learn. In our business, our 35,000 people are innately curious, right? They are excited about learning because that's how they have grown up in
right.
this. So that's a real advantage for us. But what got us kind of sparked, to use your term, to drive this learning transformation, it really was, I would say, a set of market factors and really more traditional factors for learning transformation, right? So you heard me speak a little bit about the pressure and challenge the biopharmaceutical industry is under, right? And that has to do with a desire to get more medicines to more patients more quickly. That is a more competitive environment. That is perhaps some instability in how we're regulated. All those things create an environment whereby we need to learn more quickly, right? So that's realized. The second is that we as a business, like many organizations, we're coming from a relatively decentralized set of learning functions, right? We had many learning functions across many teams around the world in our organization. And there was a desire to get more strategic impact, more strategic intent, some operational improvement, and some efficiencies by pulling those teams and really pulling those strategies together. So those are really the two major opportunities. Like a lot of folks on this call, you've probably done those learning technology audits where you go find 40, 50, 60 different learning systems. We found those, right? Or you go and discover different leadership development initiatives that are all teaching 80, 90% of the same stuff, but different vernacular, different language, different modalities, right? Or you discover really varying quality across some of our more electronically delivered learning. All those things were true for us. So it's really about quality and coming together. That was what our business leaders, and this was endorsed at our C-suite level, right? That our business leaders challenged us to do back in 2022 and 2023.
Very good. And we'll dive into some of the mechanics of what you just talked about, of the kind of review that you mentioned and some of the things that you discovered, which is not uncommon. Yeah, 60, 70, 90, we could go even higher. Technologies at play in an organization is not uncommon in that respect. Coming to you, Tim, obviously through your experience with inside Unilever, somewhat of a similar approach, albeit a little time ago. I'm intrigued as to why Unilever did that journey. But moreover, I know you spent quite some time working with leadership around the message about how learning can benefit the organization. Could you just tell us a little about the driving forces and those messages to try and get this onto the mind of the C-suite as an important topic to consider?
Yeah, indeed. And so some of the background reasons are very similar to Jeff's. Fragmentation of the learning organization, the inability to make it seamless for learners to express that curiosity, find what they wanted to find, and then also a sense that whilst the kind of the functional alignment to learning was strong, our ability to strategically say across function, because of course disruption constantly happens across organizational boundaries. So if your learning system is all aligned to current organizational boundaries, automatically that inhibits you from change because you need to help people learn things that cross boundaries. That is a problem, and I think that's a recurrent problem I hear in organizations today. So that strategic reason, I think, is what drove actually really good support amongst our senior leaders at Unilever for the change, which was important because effectively they were giving up their own learning teams to come into something bigger. So unless they buy in, you're in an immediate problem. By the way, I'm hopefully we'll come to this, but I'm also a passionate believer not to die in a ditch over purity. So my strategy was get what you can get, but do not lose momentum. Don't lose go forward momentum because you're agonizing about the bits and pieces that have been left behind. So whilst I think a lot of us have been trying to unite, don't go for purity. Because it also just leaves you in little kind of turf wars in places. So I think this kind of senior leaders absolutely bought into. We need to find ways of helping people to seamlessly express that curiosity. And by the way, I think that's a rather compelling argument to use. All the senior leaders, the really good ones that I've met at Unilever and now in my practice since, have had a very high sense of curiosity. So appealing to that and how we can enable everybody to have that and get the benefits of that, I think was important. We didn't go hard on a cost reduction argument, because I think that's a very difficult one to go in with. And actually, whilst it may be true, hopefully it is true, you will get a bigger bang for your buck In the end, you don't want people
Yeah.
to be seeing learning as a cost function and one to reduce. You want to be seen as value creating, and it's a hostage to fortune because when you do need to come back for investment, that's one of my learnings because I got it wrong. When you do need to come back, you've already educated them into a story that this should always cost less.
Yeah, great insight. We'll probably come back to that as well too. I agree, and I know you do as well, Jeff, that, when we look at learning across the enterprise in that way that you described it as a disaggregated organization, there is natural inefficiency. So there is obviously a cost benefit playing here, but we don't want to focus on that because, the intangible benefits of getting learning right, frictionless, as you said, Tim, is far more superior than looking at that. But we do need to recognize that some stakeholders, certainly in our finance cousins, may be particularly focused on the numbers as well too. So we do need to make sure we have the narrative for all of those. So two great examples of that particular situation. Jeff, you talked about that kind of review. You mentioned leadership being different vernacular, different language across the organization. You mentioned we sometimes laugh about the technology audit that sometimes happens across organizations. I know you've seen it in a couple of firms, hundreds of different systems, plethora of different technology, processes being unaligned, content being all over the place, the experience that people receive being differential. So how did you go about trying to kind of get your arms around that picture and try and make some sense of it, really, in terms of what the current state is and therefore what you could do to change it?
And what's interesting about that scenario of a multiplicity of different systems and different vernaculars out there is many folks don't view it to be a problem, right? Because it came from a lineage of serving a business need that existed at a time with a certain stakeholder group and a certain community. And that all made sense at that time. But the way I like to try to explain it to our leaders is, imagine if we had 50 different finance systems across the company, and we're all reporting our quarterly financials in the same-ish way, but using the different systems to do that. Would that lead to a good quarterly close? No, probably not, right? So that's some of the same rationale for getting a little tighter in terms of our learning investments and also technology. So how did we do it? We certainly did some work to build community over the last couple of years and understand the landscape of what was going on, right? And we did have to use our finance teams, our tech teams, our own internal teams, some outside help to do that, to really understand all of which was going on, right? So that's that first audit step. So understanding is your first step. And Tim, I appreciate your point on not trying to get to perfection, right? I am sure there remains some learning technology and programs out there that we don't know about today, that I don't know about today, but we know about 95% of those, right? So that lets us move more quickly. And then from there, we did some visioning work to figure out, specifically on the program and technology side, what would be that desired state we want to look at now and a few years down the road. And there's been a whole boatload of emergent new technologies that are AI native, and some really good work on, for example, simulated learning for leadership development, that we can say, here's where we can go, and look at how fresh, innovative this is compared to what our current stack looks like from a tech and a program perspective. So building a little bit of that tension between that gap, that pulls the team forward to start to prosecute a bit more on our current state to get towards the future. So that's how we approached it. Finding out what we have, visioning to the future, 90% right is how we've approached the work.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jeff. And that kind of, just for those on the phone, on the webinar, video conference, whichever thing we're using today, I get a bit confused. It's been a long morning. Jeff's kind of just outlined kind of phase A and phase B, that kind of review into kind of what the strategy and potentially defining what that roadmap is. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper as to what some of those fundamental shifts could do before looking at, the future that, the rise of AI can give us. But Tim, in your time when you were with Unilever, you went through a similar process to that which Jeff has outlined. You came through with a number of notable innovations in terms of learning, in terms of what you put in, certainly in the tech space. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the major shifts that you made around maybe operating model, technology, process, reorganization, why you made them, and what some of the benefits to both learning and the organization at large were as a result of that?
I do think that one of the key things in learning transformation, and to Jeff's point, the process of continual learning transformation. I go to organizations quite often where, in general, they say, "Oh, we've just been through a big transformation, but it's over now, and we'd like to dot dot dot." And I kind of have my head in my hands, thinking, kind of, no, it's not. It's never over. It's
Yeah,
never over.
yeah,
It's just a question of what comes next. The thing I think it's always worthwhile going for first are the systemic platforms. Because once you've got that in place, you can continue to evolve them and you can involve different things and you can build more on them. Even if, for example, you don't have embedded in global learning or in organizational learning all of the different teams, if you have the platforms and the operations united, what you're effectively doing is saying, come work on these because you're going to get bigger bang for your buck if we're going to make your lives easier. So it allows you to influence in a much more sophisticated way if you've got the platform sorted. Let me give you an example of what I mean by platforms to answer your question, Jonathan. For us, whilst we had through the HR information system a learning module, our belief was that it simply wasn't good enough at that point for it to be a frictionless learner experience.
right.
And so putting in a learner experience platform at that point was exactly the right thing to do. It gave us a single place to really drive learning from and to attract people in and to reward them for coming in and develop phenomenal data. We knew what people were learning, what times of day they like learning it, which allows you then to market to those people. And of course, that's the business we're in. We have to market this to people, although it's in their best interests. As we know, human beings do not do what's in their best interests often just by kind of intuiting it themselves. They need help marketing the idea to them. So I think that really helped. Having a person in the learning team whose job it was to manage that and to manage innovation, a learning standards and innovation person, I think was a massive step forward for us at that point. And then, of course, building common kind of operations through at the time and still through NIIT was enormously helpful because on those common platforms, you can basically say, come on in, everybody, whether you work for us or not, come and use this. And I think that was a game changer. In leadership development, the equivalent to that is what is the leadership behavior you're building? And I think in leadership, and in culture, that is the single most important thing to do, right? Unless you've got a common language, if every one of your providers, whether that's an individual coach or a leadership event provider, if they all come in with a different language, you are wasting money because you're simply not moving the organization holistically towards your target leadership behaviors. So getting that
Yeah,
straight as early on as we could manage was really, really important. And then, again, helps when you've got really strong operations, putting into the contracts of all our providers that they commit to coming and using our language. I hadn't heard anyone do that before, but for us, it was really important. Suddenly, if every leadership and kind of provider across a huge global business, many of whom we'd never have kind of managed directly, if their contract says you will only ever work to this language, suddenly you have a leadership development team that is massively big because all the providers
yeah,
are doing the same work for you. So thinking in that way, systemically, always thinking systemically, I think really helps, and it keeps you away from the tactical battle and keeps you into the big picture, which is if you build the
yeah,
platforms, from there you can influence. And I still find that today with organizations, there are very many that are putting in place leadership interventions without a cohesive leadership transformation framework, leadership model based on the business strategy
mm.
to work from.
Yeah, very good. I do like that systemic approach and the eyes on the bigger picture as opposed to the minutiae of some of the changes, because we all know that learning is a bundle of different processes and is very complicated to actually run. Everybody thinks it's really simple, but you guys certainly better than me know that it's a complicated organizational process to run. So Jeff,
sorry, Jonathan, can I just build on one point? Forgive me. Because the implication of what you said, and I think all of our experience around this call, is that learning is integrated with lots and lots of bits of the organization. It integrates at one end with talent management. Because leadership development and talent have got to work closely together. It links closely to technology. It links to every function strategy. It links to culture. And that if you don't have a strategic approach, managing each of those interfaces becomes really tricky.
Yeah, 100%. And ironically, that's a perfect bridge, Tim, because I was going to ask Jeff a little about if there's similarities to his journey at BMS. And I know you've also been, on the journey around this topic of skills at BMS as well too, and the two things do kind of collide and come together, Jeff. Would you just elaborate a little bit on that and some of the bigger shifts that you're making that form part of your, let's call it your learning evolution, because I agree with Tim, it's not a transformation, it doesn't start and stop, it continues.
Wouldn't it be nicer if it did, right? Wouldn't it be nicer if there was a start and then a couple of years of work and then a stop, and we would have the party and pop the champagne and celebrate and then have a couple of years of steady state? It would be nice, but it's not true, right? It's not true. No. Like evolution, it's never stopping. But to your question, Jonathan, on the skills-based organization, we are very proud at BMS for our investments in skills the last few years. In fact, we won the client award from Eightfold this year for the execution we've had on that skills-based platform here inside of our company. We have 75% of our people here who are registered, we'll call it, registered with our Eightfold tool. And we've driven a ton of career mobility internally. We've driven a ton of new opportunity for our own people based on the use of that technology. So where we've seen skills really deliver value to our company has been less so on any one taxonomy or any one ontology, right? And more so on connecting people to roles and connecting people to gig opportunities inside of our company and driving more mobility here.
Yeah.
So that's been really, really good. And our next leg on skills is we've taken the last 18 months to connect our workforce planning process, our insight that we have on our people through Eightfold and skills, as well as now our learning ecosystem to identify, given all these changes in biopharma, what are some of those more minute skills that we need more of in our company that we need to choose to either go buy or build or rent or bot or all those terms. So the learning team, we were actually emailing about it this morning, right? The learning team's focused on getting those skills out into production with some of our more innovative technology tools this year as a way to accelerate, one, the adoption of those skills, but also the adoption of some of our more innovative learning platforms whereby we can deliver them to our teams. So really nice to put together now.
Cool. Thank you for that. And it is very much an integration as well. So,
Jonathan,
I actually think it makes things a lot more exciting that, learning is therefore a much bigger role with regards to things as opposed to just the one process itself.
Before you all move on, there's some interest from the audience about what platforms you're using. Specifically, there's a question for you, Tim, about which LXP you're using at Unilever. But some other folks are pinging about different platforms that you all are using and how you're encouraging or enforcing use of those as you're thinking about skills and other implementations. So just thought, Tim, if you would chime in there.
Yeah, happy to have a go at that. So remember the kind of the period I'm talking about is some years back where we put in Degreed. I believe the organisation is now going to use Workday Learning. I actually have a view on this, which I'd love people's views on as well. I sense that AI will massively disrupt the kind of learning interface technologies. I'm talking to people who are developing kind of AI engines that will basically take out of your library everything that that it'll have access to everything you could possibly have internally and externally, and turn it into a pathway for you in no time. Look at minute 3 to minute 7 of this video, then read this. I think the need for LXPs is changing massively and very, very fast. So I would think carefully about what platforms are really necessary now. Is it an AI platform rather than some kind of interface back into your library? I think that's an area that's going to be
Yeah.
improving minute by minute over the coming kind of months and years.
Yeah, very good, Tim. And I think, let's dive into any webinar or conversation has to involve the two letters of AI. It's on everybody's lips. Everybody sees that it's going to make a significant, or has the possibility to make a significant impact on processes, to drive efficiency, innovation, all that kind of stuff, to put it into the flow of work, to finally make things actually happen real time, as you say, instant recommendations from minute 3 of this video, go look, which drives something you're trying to do almost instantaneously. And as you look across the value chain from the strategy of learning through to design and development and all the way through to operational execution and implementation and then repeat, if we take that value chain there's hundreds of applications, but many of the conversations that I'm having, people are just trying to zeroing on design and development and not really sure where and how to go. So Jeff, I know you've been thinking about this at BMS quite extensively. You're quite advanced in your thinking about the use of AI across that value chain. Can you give us a couple of examples of things that you're looking at doing to try and move things forward? And maybe for Tim's point, I think it will substantially change, or has the ability to substantially change, shall we say, the use of technology and the role that plays inside the learning process.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And, we've publicly committed to being, one of the most bullish, or I should say, invested companies in our space in AI, right, as a BMS business. So that's only emboldened our team to do more and go faster in the space of AI. I mean, a few things recently, right? So, Tim, you mentioned, deploying a learning experience platform at Unilever. We never did here. So we kind of skipped that generation of technology. Here we've had success factors and some homegrown tools, but now we've gone big with an AI native, AI first tool to be that learning experience of the future, which is deploying over the course of this year. So that was a choice for us to kind of wait for that AI technology to be ready to go. So that's one thing we're real excited about doing. More practically, we're definitely doing a few things. So one thing is, Jonathan, as you know, we've experimented with AI driven content development, right? Whereby we're able to use many different source documents, quickly put them into an AI engine, especially some of our more highly technical, medical, very specific content, and have those AI engines build some of our courses that we need for our populations, right? We operate globally. We operate in many different languages. We're always launching new indications, new products at different times around the world. That means we need a high volume of learning. So we think AI can help us on the volume question we have, in addition to the quality question we have for learning.
And Jeff,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, could you just bring in how you're handling the governance required around such a heavily regulated industry like yours as you're talking about this AI piece? That's one of the questions coming in now.
Absolutely. And we are being very careful not to duplicate governance that we already have at our corporate level, right? So I would assume that for most folks on this call by now, you will have an AI committee or some kind of AI czar, right? And some standards in your companies that exist today. We do. And we align to those policies, we align to those standards, but we're not trying to replicate or change those, right? So staying in my swim lane as a learning leader is something that's really important as we seek to deploy AI. And we've definitely learned that even in our own team, right? Because folks tend to be a little risk averse in pharma for some very, very good reasons, right? That we need to make sure folks understand the depth of our kind of AI regulation or AI governance here, so we can operate within the channels that have been defined.
Sure. Very good, very good. We've got kind of 10 minutes left. I'm keen, as we've been starting to think about how AI will revolutionize our function moving forwards. What's your personal vision for the future of learning? Tim, perhaps I ask you, where do you think it's going? What's going to happen by 2030 with all this AI stuff coming in? I know that's a bold question. I can't personally, I struggle to see beyond the end of this year, let alone 2030. But let me put it out there and see how you react.
Well, I'm gonna go kind of contrarian for a second. None of this changes, I think, some fundamentals, which is that the way I view skills and the underlying capabilities, the inner and outer game, think of it as the kind of the apps on your phone and the operating system. The human operating system is going to need to continue evolve. How you help people with uncertainty, how you help people with change, how you help leaders to inspire and create followership. That stuff needs to continue. I worry about the distraction of shiny AI and the skills focus it brings when actually the thing that's going to make the biggest difference are the leadership fundamentals in the inner game: purpose, identity, our ability to manage the fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, our ability to use intuition as well as data. And some of that stuff, yes, you can. AI will help us with, I think, coaching solutions. AI is going to massively transform leadership assessment. I think leadership assessment will look nothing like it looks now in 5 years' time. I think that's a good thing. I think it'll be democratized. I think people will have access to really powerful market as well as psychometric assessments at more junior levels in organizations. That can only be a good thing. But we're going to have to continue to evolve, to invest in the transformational experiences that help leaders to lead effectively. We know, for example, that the line manager has more impact on their people's mental health than anyone other than their therapist. We know that the single biggest variance on team effectiveness is manager capability. So I think there's a lot of those things we're going to need to continue to focus on, even if that process is going to be phenomenally enabled by AI and data. The fundamentals of helping build strong inner leadership ain't going to change and will be the critical success factor for how the rest happens.
Very true. Very true. What's your view, Jeff?
I'll compliment Tim and then give a little story. If I think about our learning spend, our learning investment, right, which is quite significant for us, and where has that money been moving? That money's been moving in a digital direction, right? Or that money's been moving in a leadership direction, right? And probably away from some of the parts of our learning ecosystem that we're working well, but weren't necessarily innovating how people learn. So Tim, I'm agreeing. It's the fundamentals of leading people, and some of the nuance there is changing as technology tools develop, right? So, for example, now when we're helping people learn how to have a feedback conversation, we're teaching them how to do it using AI tools, in addition to the classic skills of that conversation. And obviously, we're moving money in a digital direction. I think in the Wall Street Journal last week, IT function budgets are up 60% over the last few years due to the emergence of AI tools. And we're all becoming AI leaders, learning tech leaders in some way. But the little story, Jonathan, to hit the point, I was doing a roadshow presentation on learning strategy around all of our functional LTs, right? CEO -1. And I went in and learning strategy, roadmap plan, similar to that phase A through D slide you shared earlier. And end of the presentation, the functional leader pulls me aside and says, "Hey, Jeff, yeah, all good stuff, makes a lot of sense, but how come we just can't have all this stuff come through our own chat GPT? Why can't we interface with our chat GPT, learn through our internal chat GPT, have it give us our quizzes for our required courses, have it know what we're doing and give us the learning nuggets we need," right? So he was prospecting out a 2030 vision, right? And it's probably a lot of the direction that this is going, away from independent systems that require deviation from workflow towards your assistant co-pilot model that knows you. So I think we'll see a lot of that in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah. Okay, good. Love it. In that respect, all good. Thinking about some of our audience on the phone, gentlemen, that, and the poll at the beginning, many were maybe at the commencement or thinking about the journey that they're going on. I mean, you guys have been through your own evolutions, as leaders, there are ups and downs. I know, doesn't always go to plan. Sometimes you need to go slow to go fast, all that kind of good stuff that we talk about with any form of large scale change. But, what kind of advice would you give to anybody embarking on this journey, or indeed someone midway through it? Are there any kind of standout aha moments which you kind of look back on or are currently experiencing and say, okay, that would definitely be something that I would advise someone else to do? Perhaps start with you, Tim. You did mention one earlier on.
Yeah, I think being bold. So, um, I if I had my time again, it took me 3 years before I sat down and did the maths on the cost of recruitment versus the cost of redundancy versus the cost of reskilling. And
Yeah.
I kind of knew the maths, but I didn't do the maths in order to build a business case for a significant increase in skills investment. And I kind of just somehow thought, I'm trying to avoid getting this thing cut, but going in and getting an increase, I just didn't think I was going to manage it. And as soon as we put the business case together and we looked at it, and the finance guys looked at me, we went, actually, if we can reduce the number of people made redundant because of skills obsolescence, the payback is incredible. And I wish I was bolder about doing that up front. And so I would encourage that kind of strategically bold thinking,
Mm, mm.
and not to kind of believe that at time, that you're always going to be needing to cut. You're always going to need to be building business cases, but that doesn't necessarily mean it always has to be cut. And I would have gone for that boldness sooner. The second thing that I would have really done even more on was integration. For example, coming back to leadership, I think I see now more and more organizations bringing senior leadership development and senior talent management together. I think that makes a lot of sense. But then you basically, senior leadership development is spanning different bits of HR. And I think we have to work out how to just make that work and not get stuck in who runs what.
Yeah, very good. And in one 30-second, Jeff, what would your piece of advice be?
It's really easy as a leader, not easy. It's possible, easier as a leader to swing that pendulum, right? We're decentralized, let's take it all the way to centralized. We're centralized, let's give it all back to the BUs. And what I'm trying to do, which I've realized is physically nearly impossible, is holding that pendulum in the middle, right? Where you're getting the benefits of both of those two things. So holding an organization in that tension of the best of those models, that's what I'm trying to do. And that's my piece of advice, to try to get to hold that pendulum in the middle, because that's what creates a sustainable learning organization, not one that will swing back and forth 5 years on.
Great, good advice. So we're kind of coming to the end of our time. Unfortunately, we could go on for hours. I could talk to these gentlemen for ages. There's so much to do. We've talked about, transformation. It's a long-term thing. The So thank you very much, gentlemen, for bringing out your experience. I think it's been very rich, been very helpful to hopefully everybody on the phone in that respect. And I appreciate taking the times out of your day to do that for us. For those of you on the phone who want some extra kind of additional distracted by the diary thing coming up there. Additional help and support. We've recently at St. Charles at NIIT released 2 books. The first one is here on the talent-fueled organization, which is very much around how we harness talent's capabilities in the organization and talent and so on. The second one released last week, which is why it's not on here because the graphic isn't quite ready. But it's very much around the skills-based organization. So if you want to have a look at learning transformation through the lens of skills and have the playbook based on countless interviews with some of our clients, then we very much endorse that particular book as well too. We will send out details of both to all of the people who have participated in this webinar afterwards. But thank you very much for joining today. And just in close, I wondered if you could draw your attention to the poll we have on here, if there's any way that we'd like to follow up with us around an appointment, maybe a diagnostic to help you evaluate your readiness or your organization's readiness for change around this topic. if you'd like to link out to our blog series on learning transformation, which is forthcoming, or if you want to become part of our upcoming research in the impact of AI on the learning organization. So rephrased, AI-led learning transformation or learning evolution. So you can tick all of those or one of them if you'd like to interact with us on those in those ways after this. But thanks very much for Tim and Jeff for your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody else for joining. A very good conversation.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.